15. The Devil. 9 months later.
Our scouts have returned, Your Highness.
The crystal stallion bowed as low as he could, much to Flurry Heart's irritation. She had always hated the way certain ponies felt the need to worship her. However, since returning to the Crystal Empire, she had experienced little else. With the loss of both of her parents, the crown had quickly and unceremoniously landed on her head, and the burdens of rule had quickly landed on her shoulders alongside it. Despite the hole their loss had torn in her heart, she had opted to complete her mourning in private. The last thing she wanted any pony to think of her as was weak. In truth, she felt ridiculous, posed atop an elaborate throne crafted of so much gold and gemstones it made her dizzy just looking at it, commanding a nation barely older than she was. But she had no option but to persevere. Though she'd not anticipated taking the throne for another decade or so, she'd have time enough to learn the trappings of her position. In the meantime, she surrounded herself with advisors who filled her head with volumes of, often conflicting, advice.
Rise, please.
The stallion rose to full height, eyes sunken and hollow with fear. Flurry Heart's stomach clenched as she realized the news she was about to receive would not be good.
What do you have to report? Several thousand soldiers have gathered in a staging area 4 miles from the equestrian border. We estimate anywhere between 6,000 to 7,000, with more arriving every day. It cannot be anything but a precursor to invasion. They've rallied at our border before,
Flurry noted cautiously.
In greater numbers too. What makes this time so different? When we moved to get a closer look, we saw they were armed with trebuchets, catapults, and siege engines. It's inconceivable they would have moved such a large volume of heavy equipment for a mere training exercise. In addition, their breach of the 10-mile exclusion zone constitutes an act of war in and of itself. Any junior commander would be aware of this. Were you spotted?
A note of alarm jumped into Flurry Heart's voice. If Gallus felt his claw had been forced, he might well accelerate his plans.
No, Your Highness. However, we cannot ignore this provocation. It would be best to launch a surprise attack on their forces before they march on us. Exactly what I was thinking.
Lunar Diamond barked, stamping her hoof against the floor. Flurry glanced sideways at the Crystal Legion's commander.
We have the element of surprise to our advantage. Waste it now, and we'll never get another chance. I have to disagree.
Ivory Brilliant murmured, more to himself than any pony in the room.
If we attack now, we make war inevitable. It's possible Gallus is merely blustering, attempting to intimidate us, to force some concession. A war right now would leave Equestria vulnerable to an attack by the Griffin Empire. In fact, the discussion I had last month with the Griffin ambassador to Equestria leads me to think it inconceivable they would pass on the opportunity. Gallus is unhinged. He thinks himself invincible and make his moves on impulse.
Lunar Diamond spat.
If we wish to compound our advantage, we should reach out to the Griffins and offer an alliance. They'd like nothing more than an opportunity to seize the equestrian coastline and set up some fresh colonies. I will not allow my nation to forge alliances with slavers.
Flurry Heart cut across her military advisor, a harsh edge to her voice.
Defeat would be better than victory at any cost. Your Highness, this is a most dire predicament we find ourselves in. We cannot be picky about our allies. The Griffin Empire's size could easily tip the balance of a potential war in our favor. I am inclined to agree.
Ivory Brilliant chipped in.
The equestrian army has grown more brutal since the death of General Sprint. They are unlikely to show much mercy to any of us. Better that the Griffins turn Manhattan into a slave market.
Flurry snapped, losing her temper.
I would sooner die than count the Griffins among my allies. If you feel any differently, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Ivory fell silent. Flurry Heart turned her attention back to Lunar Diamond.
How many soldiers do you have under your command? Just under 3,000. More can be conscripted, if necessary, but as it stands we face a numerical disadvantage against just their expeditionary force. Of course, we will inflict much heavier casualties from a defensive position. but not enough to overcome their current numbers.
Seeing Flurry Heart's face pale slightly, she pressed on.
Equestria could likely raise an army of 100,000 in less than a year. As things stand, it's only a matter of time.
Ivory Brilliant nodded sycophantically.
Not to mention the risk posed to the Crystal Heart. We might well face annihilation upon defeat. He wouldn't.
The words left Flurry Heart's lips as a whisper. Fooling no pony.
There seems little Gallus would not do at this point, Your Highness.
Flurry shook her head slowly, trying to focus her thoughts. As much as the idea of an alliance with the Griffins repulsed her, she knew there were worse fates.
We should attempt to communicate with Equestria first. Find out what it is they want, before we make any rash decisions. Of course, Your Highness. I'll send a letter to Canterlot at once.
Flurry's heart seemed to twist in her chest as she watched the ambassador leave, a stricken expression on her face. A plume of light blue smoke rose steadily from the table, twisting itself into a series of thin tendrils before dissipating into the air. Luster's horn glowed as she focused on the source of the smoke, a small vial filled with a sapphire liquid that seemed to sparkle like liquid gemstone. Slowly, the liquid began to turn clearer, until it was virtually colorless, with merely the faintest hint of blue left. The Archmage had wasted little time in deciding her skills were best served in an alchemy lab. To her disappointment, her position at the laboratory had allowed her little time to pursue her own research, with her time mostly devoted to concocting potent psychotropics at the request of various members of the imperial family. Even more depressing was her obvious talent for synthesizing said drugs. She'd resorted, in her shame, to telling Cozy she worked as a cursebreaker. Setting the vial down atop a gentle flame, she removed her protective goggles and wiped away the thin layer of sweat that had formed on her brow. In less than an hour, it would have solidified into a solid, and snortable, batch of crystals. Of course, the money was excellent, and as long as she obeyed every order without question, and kept her mouth shut, it would continue to be excellent. Imperial mages were also immune to most forms of abuse and harassment other palace staff were forced to put up with on a daily basis. Even with the entire nation beating its war drums against Equestria, she had no desire to leave. If only Cozy saw it the same way. Despite the plush accommodation and quality food her position afforded the pair of them, her mood had improved little. Perhaps part of it was the isolation. Aside from Luster, the only regular living interaction she had was with Yasha and Eula, who had opted to stay in Griffinstone for what had started as a week, then been extended by several weeks at a time to a period of several months. Luster would guiltily admit it wasn't healthy for a filly, but she had allowed her fear of losing Cozy once more to rule her. She had expected, on top of everything else, Eula to start agitating her to go back to Equestria and face up to her crimes, as the Yak had made her promise when the pair of them had first met, but so far she'd said nothing on the topic. Maybe it was because she'd seen Cozy had no pony else, or maybe it was because Luster had started going out of her way to avoid her. Why couldn't Cozy understand what was good for her? It was infuriating to have sacrificed so much and chased her to the ends of the earth only to be treated as a contemptuous jailer. A small part of her even blamed Cozy for everything. If it hadn't been for her, none of this would have happened. She'd be finishing her studies under Twilight, groomed as a candidate for the future princess of Equestria. All gone, forever. She was going to die in a foreign country, working for a despicable tyrant. Luster jumped almost a foot in the air as the glass vial shattered, sending tiny shards of glass flying everywhere. She'd been so preoccupied with her own thought, she hadn't realized she'd still been heating the vial. With a furious flash of her horn, the glass and liquid spillage vanished. 3 hours' worth of work wasted. It looked like she would be working late tonight. Snarling, she dragged the necessary precursors from the store cupboard and started again. It took less than an hour for Equestria to respond. Flurry Heart had been in the middle of a conference with her advisors when one of her sentries had burst into the room, panting and completely out of breath. As soon as he had recovered, He gasped his news in between deep breaths.
Pegasi. Heading for the city. Dozens. Have to see.
Florrie and her guard barely made it into the castle courtyard in time. A fleet of Pegasi were clearly visible in the near distance, each wrapped in the distinctive armor of the UN. When, as she watched, her jaw tight, the first dozen came to a graceful landing in the courtyard, followed by another dozen in a tight formation. At the center was a unicorn, supported by a pair of spectral wings that shimmered in the daylight. As his hooves hit the floor and he steadied himself, his horn extinguished and his wings seemed to dissolve into the air around him. As much as she hated to admit it, it was an impressive trick. The remainder of the Pegasi began to land, easily over 100 in total, save for a dozen that continued to circle the skies, hovering above them in a manner that reminded Florrie bleakly of vultures. The unicorn stepped forward, a passionless expression etched into his handsome features, deep purple eyes boring into her as though looking within her, seeking her soul.
Flurry Heart, my name is General Morningstar. I am the commander of the UN.P. But I'm sure you've heard of me.
He glanced upwards at the spires of the Crystal Palace.
Let us dispense with formality. I'm here to offer you one final chance to surrender and return to Equestria, to face justice for your crimes. If you do not, your actions will amount to an intolerable violation of Equestria's sovereignty, and war will be inevitable.
For a moment, Florrie was tempted to order her guards to seize Morningstar and the remainder of his escort. They were outnumbered here, in the heart of the Empire, and no matter how much of a fight they put up, they were bound to lose. Capturing the commander of the UN.P. would be a major tactical boon this early in the war, too. However, there was something about the general that threw her off balance. He didn't seem the type to be taken alive, nor did he seem the type to place himself in danger's way without a backup plan. As the thoughts passed through her mind, the stallion smiled, as if reading her mind.
Should any harm befall me while I am here, I have instructed my men to ensure the Crystal Heart is destroyed when your nation is seized. And believe me, Princess, it is only a matter of time. If you are truly a mare of conviction, as you have boasted, then this choice should be an easy one. Unless, of course, that talk was all for show.
All of Flurry Heart's trepidation was replaced with disgust in an instant.
How dare you threaten my nation like that?
Pulling herself up to full height, she glared at the general with as much contempt as she could muster.
I won't cave to threat or blackmail. I advise you and your soldiers to return to Equestria. If you wish to wage war, your soldiers will find themselves meeting a quick end in our lands. On the contrary, Princess, I think you will find it is your empire that will be meeting its untimely demise soon.
Morningstar's voice was utterly devoid of any emotion, but there was a hint of annoyance in his expression.
You are surrounded on all sides and outnumbered, but if you wish to sacrifice your nation, then so be it.
With a flash of his horn, Morningstar's ethereal wings flickered back into view. Pushing off from the ground, he glanced back down at the crowd around him.
Make haste, Princess. My soldiers march at dawn. There will be no peace until justice is served, nor till Equestria is once again whole. Fall back.
With a great beating of his iridescent wings, Morningstar rose into the sky, followed quickly behind by the dozens of Pegasi who had accompanied him. Flurry watched them rise into the sky with dread. Morningstar rose higher and higher till he could seemingly go no higher. Suddenly, he stopped, and his horn began to glow even brighter. When he next spoke, his voice shook the very floor in volume, yet every word he spoke was crystal clear in its audibility.
This is General Morningstar, speaking to the citizens of the Crystal Empire.
Your princess has abandoned you to the dogs. She prefers to hide in her castle while you fight and die to uphold her unjust rule. Would rather you were slaughtered to save her own skin than face justice for her collaborationism. To those who would stand with her and support this intolerable, imperialistic meddling in equestrian sovereignty, let there be no ambiguity. Those who raise arms against my soldiers will be shown no quarter. All will be put to the spear, stallion, mare, and foal. I am not a monster. Should you choose to surrender, you will be spared your liberty, property and life guarded from harm, and your families unharmed. We seek only the restitution of justice and the reunion of our two nations as one kingdom, that we may all share in the prosperity and peace of our kind. Your princess has refused to die for you. Why should you die for her? My soldiers march at the break of dawn. You have until then to choose, death or salvation. Long live Equestria! The ground stopped shaking, the air stood still. The circling Pegasi began to fly south, and all that was left behind was the deathly silence of the courtyard. Flurry's gaze lowered slowly, only to meet the grim stare of Lunar Diamond. The trio had barely made it behind closed doors before Lunar Diamond exploded.
It's Anne, outrage, invading our lands, throwing demands around, threatening to murder innocent foals. I'd be ashamed to serve under his command. I knew I should have gone for the kill the second he landed. Then you must have missed the small army he was being trooped with. You wouldn't have made 5 yards.
There was a new, higher pitch to Ivory's voice.
This isn't good. Like it or not, they outnumber us, and it's inevitable they'll win in the end. Our citizens can put 2 and 2 together. Very few of them will want to fight back after a threat like that, and I can't much blame them. Then it's settled.
Lunar Diamond rounded on Flurry Heart, who had been watching the pair of them cross words with a dazed expression on her face.
Your Highness, we have no choice. We have to petition the Griffins for their aid.
Flurry's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eventually, she was able to force out a hoarse whisper.
I can't. Your Highness, we have no choice. Gallus and Morningstar are counting on us being isolated and defenseless, and without allies, we'll be both. I don't think you need a reminder of what the Equestrian army is likely to do when they get here. I understand you have ties to Equestria, but you seem more concerned with the well-being of their own citizens than your own. Agreed.
Ivory hissed the word, rounding on Flurry with a contemptuous look in his face.
Perhaps the general is right. You would rather offer your own citizens up to his tender mercies than bloody your hooves with the dirty business of war. I cannot. How dare you talk like that to your princess?
Flurry flew to her hooves, glaring down at Ivory Brilliant, a hint of grim pleasure flaring in her as she saw the stallion take a step back.
I have explained too many times that it is better. It is better to lose. That is, I mean.
She faltered, unsure of how to continue. She had never once before wavered from her strong convictions, but now they seemed indefensible, almost foolish preconceptions.
I will not go down in history as a collaborator to imperialist, slaving conquerors to save my own skin.
A beat of silence passed. Then, Ivory spoke once more, his voice flat.
Then give yourself up. What?
Flurry's eyes widened.
You wish to spare this bloodshed? Then surrender yourself to the Equestrians. You heard what the general said. The only thing he wants is you, and if you're turned over, the Crystal Empire will be left in peace. He said, that's insane. Do you really believe he'll willingly stay his hoof after all this effort just because I allow myself to fall into his clutches? Why would he? Why waste so much life when he already has what he needs?
A triumphant expression floated onto Ivory's features.
He can hand you over to Gallus and return home a hero. He has no need to press forward with his invasion. Weren't you listening? He seeks the reunion of our two nations as one kingdom. He plans to invade whether I offer myself up or not. He's just trying to weaken us first. Hyperbole.
Lunar Diamond was now staring at Flurry with an odd expression on her face.
He's trying to create a pretext for annexation if he's forced to go through with the invasion, to have something extra to show for his efforts. but given the option, I'd wager he'd rather not bother. He knows a war could leave Equestria open to an invasion by the Griffins, just as we do, and he knows that's not a war he could win.
Flurry could feel her face flush with anger at the way her two advisors were turning on her, as if they were accusing her of putting herself before her citizens. Yet somewhere in the back of her head, a small voice whispered to her, "Aren't you?"
So you propose I leave my country rudderless? No leader to unite behind, allow it to fall into disunity and disharmony like Equestria. What we want, Your Highness, is for you to act.
Ivory nodded with agreement.
You cannot expect us to allow you to lead us in war, if you won't take decisive action. Give us cause to rally behind you, and we will be behind you. If you won't, you are not fit to call yourself our princess.
Flurry's expression switched between the pair, a look of horror dawning on her face.
You can't. The Crystal Empire needs us to be. It needs us to do whatever we must to defend it.
Lunar Diamond snarled.
I won't lead my soldiers into a meat grinder with no prospect of victory. I, too, feel that I cannot represent my nation under such dire circumstances.
Ivory agreed.
I shall begin drafting an instrument of surrender, and with the blessing of Providence, I might secure some form of mercy from these brutes. Wait.
Flurry had tried to bark the word as an order, but it came out as little more than a strangled plea.
I.
She choked, disgusted by herself.
I'll do it. I'll make a treaty with the Griffins.
Both crystal ponies broke into smiles.
We'll need to move quickly.
With a flash of light, Ivory materialized a short stack of paper in front of her.
If these are dispatched with your fastest flyers, they should easily reach the Griffin Emperor before daybreak. The finer points of the alliance may be hashed out later, but these should give him time to rally his Bashaws to prepare their troops. With luck, they should be poised to invade the second the first equestrian troop puts his hoof over our border. Very well.
With a flick of Flurry's head, the door to the great chamber opened, and by instinct, the two guards stationed outside entered. Flurry seized the shaft of paper in her magic, and levitated it towards the waiting guards.
Dispatch this with the fastest flyer amongst our sentries. It must be on the desk of the Griffin Emperor by daybreak tomorrow.
She struggled to keep her voice under control as she spoke, as found herself strangely unable to face the guard as she spoke.
At once, Your Majesty.
The sound of hooves clattering on the floor was followed shortly by the door slamming. Flurry exhaled deeply.
May Providence grant me mercy.
Raising her head, she eyes Lunar Diamond.
Ready your troops. Make sure they hold out as long as they can. Already done, Your Highness. My soldiers are fortifying themselves in our outlying villages and outposts as we speak. I've retained a corps here in the city. We'll need to prepare emergency food and shelter for the refugees headed our way. I'll place them under your command, if you'll accept them. Of course. I'll instruct the captain of the guard to prepare for new soldiers.
A troubled look slipped onto her face.
How long do you think we'll have? It depends. My soldiers know to focus on sabotage, and if we can disable a few trebuchets, that ought to slow them down considerably. Still, with our forces spread so thinly, we can only expect heavy casualties. Once the Griffins launch their invasion, that ought to sap them of reinforcements, maybe even cause them to be recalled. Once they're on the retreat, we can focus on recruitment and fortifying our defenses. And what beyond that? What can we do to bring this war to a conclusive end? I believe Equestria will be sufficiently weakened by the Griffin assault to render them unable to launch an invasion for some time. No,
Flurry bellowed, surprising even herself.
I won't sit by the sidelines while the Griffins plunder and torch Equestria. We will take the fight to them and bring this war to an end, along with the cabal of murderers who sit atop it. You wish me to? What? Besiege Canterlot? Such a thing has never been done successfully, let alone by a nation as small as ours. I doubt the Griffins will set history on that scale, either. Not that I'd expect you to accept such a solution. We don't need to. It would be good enough to simply put Gallus and his sycophants in the ground.
Florrie spat the words with a venom she didn't know she'd had.
In case you had forgotten, I am the rightful heir of Equestria. I was robbed of my birthright, and I intend to correct that injustice as soon as I can. When these tyrants are toppled, I will be there to restore order, bring unity, and repel the griffins.
Lunar Diamond looked troubled, but Ivory seemed to approve.
Our soldiers have always prided themselves on sabotage and assassination. If there's any pony alive capable of the job, they most likely call this nation their home. Oh. Very well. I'll put together a team. But we have more pressing matters at home. My attention is required elsewhere.
She bowed deeply to Flurry Heart.
Good fortunes, Your Highness. I must summon my lieutenants to the war room. I, too, must take my leave.
Ivory bowed deeply as Lunar set off.
The Griffin ambassador will be keeping me up all night, trying to force my hoof over 1,000 things. I'll make sure the Griffin Emperor's response is handed to you as soon as it arrives. Thank you, Ivory.
Flurry Heart bowed in response. Returning to her throne, she sighed deeply, feeling her stomach twist as she pondered her decisions.
I did what I could.
She kept repeating the 5 words over and over, like a small foal seeking to reassure themselves. I did what I could. Time would only tell if it had been enough. Cozy jumped almost a foot in the air when Luster wrenched the door to their flat open and all but collapsed on the front doorstep. Staggering inside with a clumsy hoofing, she waved at Cozy, not bothering to stifle her yawn.
Evenin', Cozy. I'm exhausted. I can't even keep my eyes open. Is it okay if I just go to bed?
Cozy nodded quickly.
Yeah, you look like you could do with some sleep.
Luster chuckled and ambled off, collapsed into bed, and was out in seconds. Down the hallway, Cozy waited silently for any sound. Hearing none, she relaxed and returned her attention to her book. Within a few seconds, she could feel 2 sets of eyes on her back, and sighed.
I can't talk when Luster's in the house. You know that.
The words were a barely audible whisper, but they were enough for both Chrysalis and Tyrek to hear her loud and clear.
But we're so bored. Is this all you do in your spare time? Read boring books and talk to those ugly yaks? Don't you let loose from time to time? Lift weights, or crush a village? Don't call Eula and Yasha ugly. And it's not like I want to be cooped up in here all day and night, okay? Luster says it's not safe for me to be wandering around Griffinstone anymore. Oh, little Mayor Perfect always does everything her mommy says. Of course. I forgot.
Chrysalis jeered, teeth bared. Cozy sighed.
Luster's not my mom. She's just looking after me. Why are you two being so mean? You were so nice when you thought I was going to die. Shut up.
Both of them roared in unison, blushing deeply.
I told you never to bring that up again.
Chrysalis snapped. Tyrek shushed her, glaring at Cozy with intense dislike.
Don't let her get to you. She's just a big mama's girl, aren't you? That might work on a 3-year-old, Tyrek, but it's not going to work on me.
She flipped a page in her book.
If Luster doesn't want me to leave, then I won't. I want to, but she's right. It's not safe. Oh, very mature.
Chrysalis droned, malice in her voice.
I can't stand that sow. She reminds me so much of that starlight glimmer. What I wouldn't give to see her knock down a few pegs. At least do something more interesting than reading a book on.
Tyrek leaned in, studying the content of the text in front of Cozy.
Runes. You're a teenager. What kind of teenager spends their evenings cooped up inside, reading books about dead languages? One who doesn't want to get arrested, or full-napped.
Cozy shot back.
Or one who wants to live her life as if she never lived a day of it.
Cozy's ear twitched. Sensing he'd struck a nerve, Tarek piled in, backed up by Chrysalis.
Never has any fun. Never goes out. Never goes to parties.
Cozy jumped to her hooves, glaring at both of them.
I'm not going out, so shut up, both of you. I'm going to read my book and go to bed. You're not even allowed to go to the shop down the road,
Tarek challenged. Cozy faltered slightly.
I guess, if it was just down the street. You spent all day studying. Why not get some fresh air, maybe an oat bar?
Cozy glanced out the window. The air out there did look awfully tempting. She hadn't been outside for weeks now. The last time had been after days of begging, just to visit the market, then straight back inside.
If I wore my amulet, then it would be okay, right?
She turned back to the pair, now seeking their approval when once she had rebuffed them.
It sounds like you've already made your decision.
Cozy trotted over to her knapsack and retrieved the golden amulet Lester had used to disguise her when she'd rescued her from Griffinstone's streets. Slipping it over her neck, she was instantly transformed into a cobalt-blue Pegasus filly with short golden hair and a shield as a cutie mark. The design was perfect. No creature that passed by her would ever in a million years suspect her of being a wanted fugitive. Gazing at herself in the mirror, she made up her mind.
I'm going to the shops. Just the shops. Lester won't mind.
Retrieving a black cloak from the dresser, she pulled it around her form and tied it loosely around her neck, pulling the hood up so that her face was hidden. It might not be necessary, but it somehow made her feel more secure. Glancing carefully down the hallway for any sign of movement. When she saw none, she swallowed her apprehension and slipped through the doorway, closing the door as gently as she could behind her. Chrysalis glanced uneasily at the closed door.
Was that wise?
Tarek snorted.
Please. She's going out for a bit. It'll be good for her. I just couldn't spend another second in this miserable flat.
The pair of them passed through the wall and hovered above the cloaked form, muttering to each other so she couldn't hear.
Still, what if she gets in trouble? What if she gets hurt? You sound like Lester. She's unlikely to encounter mortal danger on the way to the shops. You're that desperate for entertainment that wandering around a shop is amusement to you? Of course not.
Tarek scoffed.
Well, maybe, but there's some small part of me that enjoyed watching that filly get her way out of scrapes. That's what I'm hoping for. That's just sadistic.
Chrysalis growled.
I love it. Let's see what happens. To opportunity.
Tarek raised his hand in a mock toast. Silently, the pair swooped downwards and began to bicker amongst themselves once more. End of chapter.